The sky in the Shadow Star domain is always gray, as if it was covered with some dirty thing. The sun can barely penetrate it, but it only casts a sick spot on the ground. Lin Haotian squatted beside the broken body armor skeleton, holding a raw wrench in his hand, full of oily hands, sweat mixed with dust on his head, making his eyes almost unable to open. He wiped his face, made a rough sentence, and continued to lower his head and slam the pile of broken copper irons in front of him. In this ghost place, you can't find any metal boards that can be used in all the boxes, he muttered, with a little impatient voice, and a sense of stubbornness. This is the edge of the Shadow Star domain, a wasteland that is left with only bones after being fought and plundered. Looking around, there were fallen armored bones, scorched building slaughter, and occasionally poisonous clouds that were scattered, making people cough. Lin Haotian grew up in this ghost place since childhood. He has long been accustomed to this environment and even learned to breathe quickly, so as not to inhale too many toxic things. He came to this ruin today and heard that someone had caught a still complete energy core nearby. If you can get it, you can sell it to the guys in the black market, and you may be able to get a few months of living expenses, and you can even buy some similar medicine for the old man at home. When he thought of this, he had a complicated look in his eyes, and his movements in his hands did not stop. He continued to remove the machine arm that had been reported in front of him, and tried to find the parts worth the money. Haotian. Don't be too slow, there is a silence in front. A rough sound started roaring, with a little impatient feeling. Lin Haotian looked up and saw it was a ox, the big chunk that always held an unlit cigarette and a beard of cheeks. He was wearing a broken work vest and carrying a huge mechanical crust on his shoulder, slamming his hands towards Lin Haotian. What's the static? Are the shackles again? Lin Haotian stood up, inserted the wrench into the tool bag at his waist, and patted the dust on his hand. He was tall and dressed in a ragged leather jacket. Under his hair, his eyes were as sharp as if he could pierce a person. His movements were wild, like a wolf cub growing up in this ruin, ready to bite at any time. It's not a robot, it's like someone is digging something, it's a loud sound. Zhang Jinyo walked over and said in a low voice, with a bit of tight expression on his face. Although he was very angry, his brain was not stupid. He knew that there were many secrets and dangers hidden here. Although the Shadow Star domain has failed, there have been rumors that there are ancient armor traps buried here, and there are technology that can change the situation. This kind of transmission has attracted many people to come and go, but most people cannot go back alive. Digging something? Who is such a big man who dares to drill soil in this ghost place? Lin Haotian glanced at his nose, lifted a broken metal rod from the ground with his hands, and held it in his hand as a weapon. He was too familiar with this ruin, knowing where there were traps and where there were poisonous, but he also knew that there were places where he didn't dare to get close easily. The area ahead is what is called the Forbidden Area. It is said that it was an ancient mechanical experiment site. The things buried in it can make people rich overnight and turn people into ashes in an instant. No matter who he is, let's go and take a look first. One is the Alliance's dog legs, so we have to run faster. Zhang Jinyu spat and walked forward first. Lin Haotian didn't say anything, just kept up silently, stepping lightly and fast, as if he was ready to face sudden situations at any time. The two of them walked through a broken pile of armored bones, and the sounds on their ears became clearer and clearer. It was a low bird of some heavy machinery, accompanied by the sound of metal hitting. Lin Haotian felt nervous. This silence was not like an ordinary scavenger could make it. He signaled Zhang Jinyu to slow down his pace, and the two of them squatted behind a huge armored bone, and looked forward. Afar, on a flat open space, several heavy excavators were working, and there were still several armored vehicles marked by the Alliance. More than a dozen uniformed soldiers came back to patrol the logic, holding energy guns in their hands, with cold and alert eyes. Lin Haotian recognized their identities at a glance: the Star Alliance's chasing team, specializing in cleaning up the chaos of the star field. Damn, why are the Alliance guys here? Zhang Jinyu said in a low voice. His face was a little hard to see. He had worked in the Alliance's machinery in a factory before and knew how ruthless these people were. Basically, no one who is targeted by them can live. See what they are looking for. Lin Haotian narrowed his eyes and his eyes fell on the open space around the excavator. A large pit has been dug on the ground, and some metal structures can be seen exposed, like the remains of some ancient facilities. His heartbeat inexplicably accelerated, and a thought flashed through his brain: is it really the epiphany in the tradition? Haotian, let's not worry about this mess, let's go. Zhang Zinia pulled him, with a little anxiety in his voice. This place was already in danger, and if you talk about joining the Alliance, you are simply seeking death. Let's go. Where to go? This place is our floor. What are they going to do here? Lin Haotian gritted his teeth, and there was a hint of anger in his eyes. He has been living in this ruin since he was a child and has long regarded it as his own floor. The members of the Alliance came here to dig something and clearly did not take them seriously. You boys' brain is in the water? We're in the Alliance, we don't have to stuff our teeth together. Zhang Haniu said softly, staring at him with anger. But Lin Haotian ignored him and stared at the open space, as if he had made up some decision. At this moment, a loud noise suddenly came from the distance, as if something was blown up. The soldiers around the excavator immediately alerted, and several soldiers, like military officers, walked out of the armored cart and looked into the pit. Lin Haotian took this opportunity to move his position quietly and try to see the picture more clearly. The things in the pit finally revealed their true colors. It was a huge armored body, all black, with ancient runes and cracks on the surface. Although it was just a slaughter, the pressure made people breathless. Lin Haotian realized the origin of this thing at a glance. This is not an ordinary armor, this is the god of war in the tradition, a taboo work from ancient times, saying that it has the power to destroy the planet. Is this mother real? Zhang Jinyo also saw it, his eyes wide open like copper flap, and his voice was trembling. Although he is an engineer of the machine, he has never heard of such a level of things several times. Lin Haotian's brain was blank. He has heard countless stories about war god from a novel that he once belonged to a mysterious family, but because his power was too terrifying, it was sealed by the Alliance in the depths of the Shadow Star domain. He never thought that one day he would see this with his own eyes. Captain, it's confirmed that it's the target armor, and the energy core still has a bad reaction. A soldier in the pit held the detector and made a loud noise. The military officer next to him pointed his head and showed a proud sneer on his face. Very good, notify Zhao to be invincible and prepare for transportation. If this thing can be started, the rebels will wait for the garbage to be crushed. The military officer's voice was as cold as ice, and Lin Haotian's heart sank. Zhao Wuning, this name is a nightmare in the Shadow Star domain. Lin Haotian had heard this name countless times and knew that he was a cold-blooded commander sent by the Alliance to suppress the rebels. He had no idea how much blood was covered in his hands. If the god of war really fell in his hands, these people in the Shadow Star realm would probably have no hope in the end. Haotian, don't look at it, we really have to leave. Zhang Zinia pulled him again, his face full of anxiety. But Lin Haotian didn't move, staring at the armored body, and there was only one thought in his brain: he couldn't let the Alliance take this thing away. You go, I have to stay. Lin Haotian's voice was low, and there was an unquestionable sense of determination. Zhang Jinyo was stunned for a moment, then immediately made a rough sentence, and slapped his thigh hard. You kid is really a crazy guy. Okay, I'll accompany you once, I'll be a companion if I die. He gritted his teeth, although he was stolen, but he still took out a handful of electromagnetic gun from his backpack and prepared to move at any time. Lin Haotian didn't say anything, but just clicked a little, and his eyes fell on the skeleton of the machine armor again. He didn't know why he had such an impulse, but he told him that this machine had some connection with him, and might even have something to do with the tragedy 10 years ago in his home. At this moment, a sudden emergence of a rapid alarm came from the distance, and the soldiers turned around and looked in the other direction. Lin Haotian looked at them and saw a team of figures wearing black battle suits slamming out of the shadows of the ruins, as fast as ghosts. They hold various weapons in their hands and act cleanly and neatly, which is obviously well-trained fighters. Rebel. It's a rebel. A soldier shouted, and the gun sounded immediately, and the scene was in chaos. Lin Haotian and Zhang Jinyo looked at each other and knew in their hearts that this matter was going to be big. The rebel figure on the head was particularly eye-catching, a tall woman with long hair and a tall horsetail, wearing a black fighting suit with a sturdy body, and her movements were as fast as a leopard. She held a short energy blade in her hand, and each shot was extremely accurate. Several Alliance soldiers had fallen down without reacting. She wore a half-metal mask on her face, and the exposed half-face was cold and swollen, and there was a murderous look in her eyes. Ye Shuanghua. Lin Haotian said this name in a low voice, and his heart was shocked. He heard this woman, the leader of the rebel army in the Shadow Star domain, an existence that made the Alliance so painful. She said that she was a genius student at the Alliance Army School, but later defected because her family was slaughtered and vowed to overthrow the Alliance's rule. Ye Shuanghua, you are looking for death. The military officer at the pit roared, pulled out the energy sword from his waist and rushed towards her. But Ye Shuanghua just smiled coldly, and his figure flashed. He easily avoided his attack. He immediately kicked him in the chest and kicked him a few meters away. All the dogs, go back to your nest. Her voice was cold, carrying unquestionable majesty. Then, she turned her head and looked at the pit. Her eyes fell on the skeleton of the World War god, and a complex look flashed in her eyes. Lin Haotian looked at this scene and suddenly felt indescribable. He knew that it was absolutely not accidental that Ye Shuanghua came here. Like the Alliance, she is both under the armor of this machine. And he, a small scavenger, was inexplicably rolled into this storm. Haotian, what are we going to do now? Run around, or? Zhang Jinyo asked in a low voice. The gun in his hand was already tightly clenched and ready to go at any time. Lin Haotian did not answer, but just held the metal rod in his hand tightly, with a hint of determination in his eyes. He knew that no matter whether it was the Alliance or the rebels, whoever got this armor would change the fate of the Shadow Star domain. And he had to do something, even if it was just to figure out the connection between this machine and his past. Iron Cow, prepare your gun, we have to fold a foot. He said softly, sneering at the corner of his mouth. Zhang Jinyo was stunned for a moment, and immediately grinned, full of excitement. Okay, I'm a big fuck. He patted Lin Haotian on the shoulder, and the two looked at each other, and immediately approached the battlefield quietly, ready to find their own chance in the chaos in this scene. The fire and explosion sounds on the battlefield were rising one after another, and the burnt metal smell and the pungent breath of energy weapons were filled with the air. Lin Haotian and Zhang Jinyo squatted behind a piece of fallen armored bones, carefully observing the chaos ahead with the cover of the bones. The fire between the rebels and Alliance soldiers became more and more intense. The blue beam of the energy stairs burst out dazzling trunks in the gray air, and occasionally the huge grenade explosion was shaking, making the ground tremble slightly. We really want to fuck you like you're desperate to fight? Zhang Jinyo muttered in a low voice, holding the self-made electromagnetic gun in his hand. Although he was still the same look on his face, his eyes were clearly showing a few tight spots. Although he was hard-mouthed, he was not a professional fighter. He was still good at repairing the machine and armor. He was really on the battlefield and felt a little scared. Lin Haotian didn't say anything, but just sniffed his eyes fixed on the dark armored bones away. The God of War, this name is like a group of fire, burning more and more in his brain. He didn't know why, but he always thought that this machine had some kind of unclear connection with him, such as a clip that was diamond from his memory, which was vague and really panicked. Iron Cow, don't miss it. We are not here to watch the show. Lin Haotian finally opened his mouth, his voice low, with an unquestionable stubbornness. He took out the cracked metal rod from his waist. Although this thing was useless on the battlefield, he felt a little confident when he held it. Can your broken gun work? Don't get stuck at the time. Damn, you kid still dares to look down on my handcraft? Zhang Jinyo heard this, and Lima was displeased. He patted the gun in his hand, and his face was full of disdain. Can this thing destroy a whole light armor? Isn't it a piece of cake to kill a few Alliance's dog legs? But you, taking a broken iron stick, really think you are a war god? Lin Haotian pulled the corner of his mouth, ignored him and turned his eyes forward again. The rebels led by Ye Shuanghua had already suppressed part of the defense line of the Alliance soldiers. Her movements were as fast as a black flash, and every move was clean and neat, almost no move was too much. Her short energy blade rolled out cold lights in the air, and several Alliance soldiers fell to the ground without even being able to scream. The military officers in the Alliance were obviously not vegetarians. Although they were kicked by Ye Shuanghua, they quickly got up, roared and pointed at their subordinates to reassemble, and also adjusted several light battle armors from the armored car to try to turn the situation. The Alliance helps the guy, it's true that it's a hard stock. Lin Haotian gritted his teeth, and there was a hint of alertness in his eyes. Although those light armors are not as good as monsters like the God of War, they are still relatively poor against ordinary soldiers, and the pressure on the rebels has become much greater in an instant. Haotian, what is our goal? You can't really follow this helper, right? Zhang Jinyo asked in a low voice, and cold sweat was already emerging from the head. Although he promised to accompany Lin Haotian to the scene, he was still unsure. After all, the two of them combined were just a bunch of broken equipment, and there was no such thing as a defense. The goal is that armor. Lin Haotian said without hesitation, his eyes still not leaving the deep pit where the God of War was located. The Alliance and the rebels are fighting this thing, we can't let it fall into either side. What? Are you crazy? That thing is a taboo armor, and the Alliance is afraid of death. What's the use of it if we take it? Why not run away while the matter is? Zhang Jinyo widened his eyes, his voice a little higher, and he clearly felt that Lin Haotian's thoughts were simply a strange thing. Run? Where to go? The Shadow Star domain is such a big place. If the Alliance really starts this armor, do you think we can still have a way out? Lin Haotian sneered, turned around and looked at Zhang Jinyo, his eyes full of determination. This is impossible to deal with my family's affairs, so I must figure it out. Zhang Jinyo was stunned for a moment. Zhang Zhang's mouth wanted to say something, but finally closed. He knew that once Lin Haotian knew anything, he would not be able to pull back. He sneered and slapped his thigh hard. Okay, I'll give you this life today. But I'll say that, if I really do it, you have to burn me some paper money. Don't worry, you will leave all the burned parts for you. Lin Haotian grinned and immediately patted Zhang Jinyo on the shoulder, indicating that he would prepare. Taking advantage of the fact that the rebels and the Alliance soldiers were fighting hard, the two quietly walked out from behind the dead and touched the deep pit. The chaos at the war gave them a great cover. The energy beam and the explosion of smoke made the visual blurry. Occasionally, the flowing flew over them, which made Zhang Jinyo sweat in a cold sweat, but Lin Haotian seemed to have no feeling, and he was moving quickly and stably, almost sticking to the ground. He was too familiar with the terrain of this ruin, and knew where there was a cover and where to hide from the visual line. After a few minutes, the two of them had approached the edge of the deep pit. In the deep pit, the dead body of the war god lay quietly there, and the dark shell reflected a strange light under the faint light. Although it was just a slaughter, the pressure still made people breathless. Lin Haotian squatted in the pit, looked down, and his heartbeat couldn't help but speed up a few points. He could feel that there was a certain power hidden in this machine armor, as if he was alive, summoning him. This thing is really evil. Zhang Jinyo also came over and took a look, his face turned a little white. He is an engineer of the machine and is very familiar with the structure of the machine, but the design of the machine in front of him is completely beyond his knowledge. The runes and cracks, like some ancient language, have an indescribable danger. Don't be stunned, go down and take a look. Lin Haotian didn't think much, but slid down from the pit. His steps were light and fast, and he almost didn't make any sound. Zhang Jinyo made a rough sentence. Although he was reluctant, he still followed him. He never put down the gun in his hand and was ready to face the sudden situation at any time. The air at the bottom of the pit was colder than above, with a strange smell of metal and soil. When Lin Haotian approached the God of War, he found that this armor was larger than he thought, and the only part of the breastplate that was killed was as high as 3 floors. He stretched out his hand and touched the dark shell lightly. When his fingers touched it, he felt a cold chill rolling up his fingertips, as if he had been bitten hard by something. "Damn, this thing is weird," he whispered and quickly turned his hand back, but the urge in his heart became stronger and stronger. He walked around the dead body and found that the driving position of the motor armor was actually quite complete. Although the door was tightly closed, there was a clear palm-tie identification device on it, as if waiting for someone to open it. "Haotian, don't you really want to crawl in, do you?" Zhang Jinyo looked at his movements, his face turned green, and his voice was full of incredible. "This thing is a taboo armor. Who knows what the hell is there? When it explodes, we will be left with no residue. What are you afraid of? How can you know if you don't try?" Lin Haotian gritted his teeth, and there was a hint of madness in his eyes. He didn't know why, but he always thought that the armor was waiting for him, as if he had hit a designated one. He pressed his hand on the palm recognition device, silently recited "God bless" in his heart, and immediately closed his eyes, waiting for the result. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, nothing happened. Lin Haotian opened his eyes quietly and found that there was no reaction on the identification device, as if it was damaged. He relaxed his voice and was a little disappointed. He just wanted to hold his hand open, but suddenly he heard a low mechanical gecko from the inside of the machine. "Drip identity is successful, the gene match is 87%, and the emergency mode is activated." A cold electronic sound starts, and the door of the driving door opens quietly, revealing a dim inner space. Lin Haotian was stunned for a moment, his brain was blank, and he never expected such a result. "Don't you? What's going on? You kid are really the owner of this thing?" Zhang Jinyo widened his eyes, his voice trembling a little. Although he didn't know about gene matching, he also knew that it was no coincidence that this kind of ancient armor could recognize the owner. Lin Haotian didn't answer, but just stared at the open driving, his heart beat as fast as if it was about to explode. He knew that once this step was gone, he might never be able to get back. But he has no choice, the Alliance and the rebels are fighting for this armor, and if he doesn't do anything, the future of the Shadow Star will only be worse. "Iron Cow, help me stay outside, I'll go in and take a look," he said softly, gritting his teeth and crawling into the driving. The space inside was narrower than he thought, with a scent of old smell in the air, and the control panels around it were covered with dust, but strangely, there was a faint energy reaction on those ancient instruments, as if they could start at any time. Lin Haotian sat in the driving seat and tried to explore the control rod. A sharp sting suddenly flashed in his brain, as if someone was stuffing something into his brain. He gritted his teeth and endured the inappropriateness. He immediately heard the cold electronic sound again. "While the system is turned on, the energy core is 17%, warning that the machine damage rate is as high as 82%, and it is recommended to repair it immediately." "Repair your big house, where's the time now?" Lin Haotian said in a low voice and tried to start the main control system. With a low bird, the lights in the driving wheels lit up. Although they were weak, they were enough to let him see the surrounding situation clearly. He discovered that although the control system of the Ageman god was ancient, it was designed very exquisitely, even more advanced than the armor that was currently in service in the Alliance. At this moment, a sudden burst of footsteps came from outside the pit, followed by Zhang Jinyu's roar, "Haotian, come out soon. The Alliance people have discovered us." Lin Haotian felt nervous and quickly poked his head out of the driving gear. He only saw that a few Alliance soldiers had already hit the pit, and the energy step gun in his hand directly targeted them. "Damn, it's so fast." Lin Haotian gritted his teeth, quickly retracted the driving force, and tried to start the defense system of the motor armor. Although the World War God was broken, the basic defense function seemed to be useful. As he pressed a button, a faint energy shield suddenly lit up on the shell of the armor-killing body, barely squeezing the first wave of energy beam attack. "Iron Cow, come in." Lin Haotian shouted outside, and Zhang Jinyo didn't say anything and jumped into the driving force. Although the space was so small, he could at least avoid the firepower outside. "Is this broken thing really moving?" Zhang Jinyo started complaining as soon as he came in, but the movement in his hand did not stop. He quickly checked the control panel and tried to repair some basic functions. You will know if you can move or not. Lin Haotian bit his teeth tightly, held the control rod with both hands, and tried to start the active power system of the motor armor. With a violent shock, the god of war finally started to move. Although the movement was slow and clumsy, the power was shocking. The Alliance soldiers outside the pit obviously did not expect that the dead body could move, and they retreated, and their faces were full of shock. Captain, this thing is alive. Call reinforcements. A soldier shouted, his voice full of panic. Not far away, Ye Shuanghua also noticed the static here. There was a shock in her eyes, and she quickly rushed towards the pit. No matter who you are, stop this armor. Her voice was cold and majestic, and the short energy blade in her hand was already tightly grasped. Obviously she did not intend to let anyone easily control the war god. Lin Haotian saw this scene from the observation window of the driving wheel and his heart sank. He knew that Ye Shuanghua was not easy to mess with, but in the current situation, he didn't have time to talk to her at all. He gritted his teeth, tried to stand up as he controlled the machine, and was ready to run the sudden outbreak. Iron Cow, we're sitting there, we're going to rush out. He growled and immediately pushed down the control rod. The god of war god's sword let out a low roar and stood up. Although the movement was stiff, the pressure made the people around him take a step back. The firelight on the battlefield reflected on Lin Haotian's face, and his eyes were full of determination. He knew that this armor was his only code, and he would not let it fall into their hands, whether it was the Alliance or the rebels. And this battle just began. The skeleton of the war god stood up in the deep pit, and a low mechanical roar was shaking, causing the gravel around him to shake. Lin Haotian held the control rod tightly, sweat slipped off his head, staring at the scene outside the window. The lights in the driveway flickered and red warning signs kept flashing on the instrument, reminding him that this armor might collapse at any time. But he didn't have to choose. Outside were the Alliance soldiers and the rebels led by Ye Shuanghua. Both sides of the country were staring at this taboo work with a covetous look. Haotian, you guy is really crazy. This broken thing can explode at any time. We might as well jump down and run away. Zhang Jinyo was in the corner of the driving, and his hands were busy adjusting a broken control module, his face full of sweat. Although he was stumbled on his mouth, his hands did not stop, and he tried to get this broken machine a little longer. Run? Have you ever run through the Alliance's chasing force or the rebels' energy blade? Lin Haotian gritted his teeth, sneered, and pushed the control rod with both hands. The god of war of the world stumbled and took a step forward. The huge mechanical palm stomped the stone at the bottom of the pit, making a huge sound. The Alliance soldiers outside were shocked by this silence and retreated. Several small ones even threw down their weapons and turned around and ran away. Captain, this thing is really moving. Please ask for reinforcements, the Zhao Wushou officer must know this. An Alliance officer shouted at the edge of the pit, and the communication device in his hand was almost crushed. His face was blue, and he obviously didn't expect that the taboo armor mentioned in this newspaper could really be activated. On the other side, Ye Shuanghua stood at the height of the ruins that was far away, his eyes coldly locked on the god of war. Her high tail swayed slightly in the wind, and the black battle suit was covered with dust and blood, but the majesty was not reduced at all. The short energy blade in her hand flashed with cold light, as if she had been ready to cut the armor into 2.5 at any time. No matter who you are, stop this armor. It's not something you can control. Her voice penetrated the noise of the battle and passed straight into Lin Haotian's ears, bringing an unquestionable sense of pressure. Lin Haotian glanced at her from the window, and his heart became tight. He knew that Ye Shuanghua was not joking. It was not up to the verbal effort that this woman could become a leader of the rebels. But in the current situation, he had no time to explain to her, and he had no intention of handing over the god of war. He gritted his teeth and said to Zhang Jinyo in a low voice, Iron Yo, how much energy core is left? How long can it last? There is still 15% left, and I can barely move, but the weapon system is basically gone, and the defense shield is about to collapse. You'd better not expect this thing to fight a tough battle. Zhang Hania knocked on the control panel, sneering around, feeling unhappy. If you can't fight a tough battle, you have to get out. Staying here is waiting for death. Lin Haotian took a deep breath and his eyes swept across the battlefield. Alliance soldiers have begun to reassemble, and several light fighter armors are approaching here, and Ye Shuanghua's rebel army is not leisurely, and is surrounding the side wings, obviously not intending to let this armor fall into the Alliance. We're sitting there, let's suddenly jump. Lin Haotian growled and pulled the control rod suddenly. The god of war released a harsh metal friction sound, and his huge body rushed forward. Although the movement was as stiff as a raw iron block, the power could not be underestimated. The Alliance soldiers at the pit were shocked by this sudden shock and fled in all directions. Several of them were slow to react and were directly stomped into meat paste by the armor's palm. The energy beam and the spider hit the outer shell of the god of war, making a harsh thrust sound. Lin Haotian bit his teeth and controlled the armor to rush forward with firepower. The warning sounds and the driving will became more and more rapid, and the red warning light almost blinded him. He knew that the state of this armor was too bad, and he overdrawed only the remaining energy every step forward, but as long as they could get out of this battle, they still had the chance to survive. Haotian, on the left. A machine armor has come. Zhang Jinyo suddenly shouted and pointed at an Alliance light machine armor outside the window. The armor was extremely fast, and the energy cannon on his shoulder had been fully charged, and the blue light pointed directly into the chest of the god of war. Damn, I can't hide anymore. Lin Haotian replied, suddenly turned the control rod, and tried to avoid the side of the god of war. But this broken armor reacted so slowly that it was not as good as a complete turn. The beam of the energy cannon hit the left shoulder of the armor hard, and a dazzling spark burst out. The entire driving slam shook violently, which made Lin Haotian and Zhang Jinyo almost fall from their seats. Warning, the armor killing rate on the left shoulder reaches 95%, and the energy core is too high. The cold electronic sound rose again, as harsh as a death talisman. Lin Haotian gritted his teeth and vigorously carried out the balance of the armor. His eyes swept through the instrument display and found that the reading of the energy core had dropped below 10%, and he might stop at any time. Iron Cow, can you transfer energy to the push-in system? We have to speed up, or it's a living target, he shouted, his voice full of anxiety. I'm trying, but you'd better not have too much hope. The line of this broken thing is like a bunch of numb. Zhang Jinyo frowned and opened a control panel, and started connecting it in a greasy manner. Although his movements were fast, the expression on his face became increasingly difficult to see. It was obvious that the internal structure of this armor was even more complicated than he thought. At this moment, Ye Shuanghua's figure suddenly appeared in front of the god of war. She turned over and slapped on a collapsed armored body, staring at the driving force where Lin Haotian was, her eyes as cold as ice. Her energy short blade has been transformed into a heavy energy gun, and the gun directly points to the driving position of the god of war. One last warning, stop the armor, or I will destroy it with my own hands. Her voice penetrated the noise of the war scene, with a creepy killing. Lin Haotian's heart sank, knowing that this woman knew it. If she really opened her gun, the god of war's driving can't withstand this close attack at all. But he didn't have time to hesitate. The League's A-team had approached from behind. The muzzles of several heavy 18 were being charged, ready to give them a fatal blow. Ye Shuanghua, I don't plan to fight you, but this armor cannot fall into the Alliance's hands. Lin Haotian gritted his teeth and yelled back from the diving speaker, his voice determined. If you really want to change the fate of the Shadow Star domain, don't swear me. Ye Shuanghua's eyes flashed slightly, as if he had been touched by his words, but she still didn't put down her gun. She was silent for a second, and then said coldly, do you think you can control this armor? Its power is not something you can bear. Can you bear it? I will know after trying. Lin Haotian didn't say anything anymore, but suddenly pushed down the control rod, and the god of war rushed forward and directly crashed into the dead body where Ye Shuanghua was. Ye Shuanghua's figure flashed and easily avoided this clumsy impact. He immediately hit the side of the armor, and the energy gun started to fire continuously. Several beams of light accurately hit the relevant part of the God of War, and a string of sparks burst out. Damn, this woman is so cruel. Zhang Xinyu was so shocked that he couldn't help but whisper. He finally took a good route, and the energy to push into the system finally increased a little. The speed of the warrior god was slightly faster, but it was still far away. Lin Haotian bit his teeth tightly and quickly flew in his brain to calculate the solution. He knew that if this continues, they would be killed by the Alliance and the rebels. The only way out is to get out of this ruin, find a place to hide, and wait until the risk is over. But the problem is that the energy of the God of War could not be suppressed at that time. At this moment, a deep sound of horns suddenly came from a distance, like some huge machine approaching. Lin Haotian felt nervous and looked in the direction of the sound. He saw a giant silver-gray armor walking out of the shadow of the ruins. The Alliance mark on his shoulder was particularly dazzling in the fire. The body shape of the armor was larger than that of the God of War. The heavy armor was filled with traces of war, and a suffocating feeling of pressure was suffocating. Iron Blood Overlord. Zhao is absolutely coming. A flash of tightness was brought to the voice of Ye Shuanghua for the first time. She quickly turned her head, her eyes locked on the giant armor, and her hand holding the energy gun tightened slightly. Lin Haotian also recognized the name of this armor, the Iron Blood Overlord, Zhao's unparalleled specialty driver, known as the Alliance's most powerful anti-aircraft armor, which almost no one can break. His heart sank, knowing that things are going to be bad. Zhao Wui came out of power, showing that the Alliance's emphasis on the World War God is far beyond his imagination. Do you dare to scatter the rebels in my ground? A low and cold sound came from the Overlord of the Iron Blood, like a bad ghost crawling out of the ground. In the following way, the heavy energy cannon on the shoulder of the armor began to be charged, and the blue light illuminated half of the battleground, pointing directly to the location of Ye Shuanghua. Ye Shuanghua gritted his teeth, flashed his body, and quickly hid behind a slaughter, avoiding the first wave of attacks. But the waves of the energy cannon still stir up a huge wave, which made the surrounding ruins begin to collapse. Lin Haotian took this opportunity to control the God of War to rush in another direction and try to leave the center of the battleground. Want to run? It's not that easy. Zhao's unsightly voice sounded again, and the Overlord of Iron Blood turned over, and his huge mechanical arms suddenly slammed his body, directly smashing a pile of heavy skeletons at the God of War. Lin Haotian couldn't react in time, and the armor was hit hard, and he stumbled back a few steps, and the instrument inside the driving block was alerted almost all. The energy core is 5%, and the system is about to close. The cold electronic audio pierced Lin Haotian's ears like a knife. He bit his teeth and closed it, sweating all over his head to calm the armor, but a feeling of powerlessness surged deep in his heart. He knew that the God of War had reached the limit, and if he continued, he would only drag down all of them. Haotian, we have no way. This broken thing can't be stopped. Zhang Jinyu's voice was filled with hope. He slapped the control panel hard, as if he had let go. Lin Haotian didn't say anything, but just stared at the Iron Blood Overlord outside the window, turning quickly in his brain. He knew that Zhao's unscrupulous goal was the God of War, and as long as they were still in this armor, it would be impossible to escape. But if the armor is abandoned, they will immediately become living targets for the Alliance and the rebels. At this moment, Ye Shuanghua's figure suddenly appeared on the side of the God of War. She held the energy gun in one hand and threw out an electromagnetic bullet in the other hand, directly hitting the Iron Blood Overlord's joint part. Although it could not cause any physical damage, it at least made the action of the giant armor a little. Follow me. This armor cannot fall into Zhao Yuang's hands. Her voice came from the communication channel, carrying a hint of anxiety. Lin Haotian was stunned for a moment, but he didn't expect that she would take the initiative to help. But he also knew that this was the only way out at the moment. Iron Cow, be ready to jump, let's follow her. Lin Haotian gritted his teeth and made a decision quickly. He pressed a button, set up the self-destruction program of the God of War, and immediately opened the driving door and jumped down with Zhang Heinyu. The moment it landed, the energy beam and the spider came from all directions. Lin Haotian gritted his teeth, lifted a broken energy step gun on the ground, and ran towards Ye Shuanghua while opening the fire. Zhang Heinyu followed him, banging with discomfort, but his pace did not slow down. The self-destruction program starts, and the 10-second countercalling time begins. At the battlefield of the warrior god, the energy core of the instant armor begins to emit dazzling light, like the sun that is about to explode. Zhao's inexorable iron blood overlord quickly retreated, clearly realizing the danger, and the surrounding alliance soldiers and rebels also scattered, trying to get away from the explosion range. "Run! Don't turn back!" Ye Shuanghua growled and led Lin Haotian and Zhang Heinyu into the shadow of a ruin. Behind him, the murderous bones of the World War god finally reached the point of boundary, and a huge fireball burst out, which swallowed nothing around. Even the iron blood overlord was overturned to the ground, making a harsh metal-twisted sound. Lin Haotian was pushed by the airwaves and fell down with a buzzing sound in his ears, his mouth full of mud and blood. He couldn't get up, turned around and looked at the sea of fire behind him, and his heart was filled with scent. The God of War was gone. The armor that had inexplicably contacted him eventually turned into a pile of waste irons. "Don't be stunned, Zhao Yi will never let us do this." Ye Shuanghua's voice pulled him back to reality. She pulled Lin Haotian with one hand, her eyes were still cold, but there was a little more complexity in her deep eyes. "Why did you destroy it? That machine armor may be our only hope to overthrow the Alliance." "Hope? That thing is a curse. Who is unlucky to take it?" Lin Haotian wiped the blood from his face, his voice was low and sandy. "Another, I won't destroy it. Will Zhao never let us go?" Ye Shuanghua was silent for a moment, and said nothing more, but just clicked the head and signaled them to follow. Her rebels have gathered in the depths of the ruins and are ready to evacuate the battlefield. Lin Haotian and Zhang Heinyu glanced at each other, and although they were covered in scars, they still gritted their teeth and followed. Far away, the overlord of the iron blood stood up from the ruins, and the loud sound came from the sound expansion device, carrying endless anger. "Ye Shuanghua, Lin Haotian, you can't escape. The Shadow Star field is mine." Lin Haotian heard the sound, clenched his fists, and a cold light flashed in his eyes. He knew that this battle was far away. The nitrazine at the war has not dissipated, and the burnt smell is still radiating in the air, but a new flame is ignited in Lin Haotian's heart. Although the God of War was gone, his and Ye Shuanghua's goal was to overthrow the Alliance and rebuild the freedom of the Shadow Star domain. He turned his head and glanced at Zhang Heinyu beside him, then looked at Ye Shuanghua's decisive back, and a bitter smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. "Iron Cow, are you ready? We still have a tough battle to fight." His voice was low, and he felt an unyielding stubbornness. Zhang Heinyu patted the gray on his body and grinned. "Damn, as long as there are parts, when will I not prepare for it? Let's go, fuck him a lot." Ye Shuanghua glanced at them, and then turned around and walked towards the depths of the ruins. Lin Haotian and Zhang Heinyu followed closely, although their steps were heavy, each step was full of strength.